It is Sunday, August 4th, 2024, and we are live on Ancient Faith Radio. Welcome to Everyday Orthodox. I'm Elisa Bielatich-Davis, and we get together here on Sunday nights to meet everyday Orthodox Christians. You know, we're very divided up as Orthodox people in North America. We are in all different jurisdictions. We're worshiping in different languages. Sometimes we're even on different calendars. But I think really the first step to having true unity in Orthodoxy here in North America is, I think it's not so much about whose bishop lines up with whose bishop, but it's, do we know one another? You know, do we care about one another? Are we brothers and sisters in Christ? So that's our little project here, is to just get to know each other and come on, listen, and get to know somebody from a different jurisdiction, a different walk of life, and see how they're living out their faith. So that's what we're doing tonight. And as usual, Matushka Trudy Richter is right here engineering the program, and she is answering calls. So if you would like to say hello to Matushka, you can call 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346, and she will patch you right through, and you can ask our guest a question. And you might want to do that because we have pretty great guests tonight. So also, by the way, we stream live on the Ancient Faith website, on the AFR app. We stream live on YouTube, and that is with video, so you can see our smiling faces. And we're also on AFM's Facebook Live feed. And of course, if you ever miss a live show, you can always see it in the archives, both on YouTube and the Ancient Faith app and website. All right. Now we've covered it all. So let me tell you about our guest tonight. It's Dr. Mark Faries. So I went to A&M with my daughter, Texas A&M. I live in Texas. My daughter's thinking about going to Texas A&M. And they had something, I think it might be the first one ever, called OCF Day. They have an amazing OCF chapter there. And we went, and they're showing us around campus, and, you know, we're meeting all these people. And they brought in a panel of professors. And Dr. Mark is one of them. And they were just amazing, just really wonderful, down-to-earth, lovely, intelligent, Orthodox people who are working with the students in the OCF. And it was really neat. It's really neat to see. So we'll talk a little bit about that OCF chapter. That's Orthodox Christian Fellowship. I always want to say Orthodox College Fellowship because it's kind of our Orthodox college program. It's campus groups of Orthodox Christians trying to support the kids in their faith and help them grow during this important time in their lives. So anyway, we'll talk a little bit about that because, of course, Mark works with the OCF chapter there at A&M, but he's an Adjunct Associate Professor, and he's in the College of Medicine and the School of Public Health. So he is the director of something called the Well Church Initiative, and he'll tell us a little bit about that. He specializes in theology in health, health behavior change, and the role of religious beliefs in chronic disease prevention. So if you think about things like medication adherence, right? Like, are you taking the medication you're supposed to take every day? And what is the role of your religious outlook? And what is the role of theology in these questions? And so he works like with churches, talking about the health of the parishioners in the church and how the church can support that. It's really pretty neat. And so we'll hear all about it. But without any further ado, Mark, welcome to the program.
Hey, thank you so much. Glad to be here.
It's great to have you here. It was really fun meeting you at A&M, and I'm excited that you're on the program. I want to hear more. Honestly, partly just, selfishly, I just want to hear more about what you do because I think it's so interesting, and I was not aware of anybody studying these things or looking at them, and I just think this is great. But let's start at the beginning. Before A&M, before everything else, where were you born and raised? What was your childhood like?
So I was born in a 1976 Ford pickup truck on the way to the hospital. So very Southeast Texas start to life. And so, yes, was born and raised mostly all through Southeast Texas. And my childhood was good. I mean, my parents did divorce when I was 4. I have 5 older brothers. And I was the surprise that came 8 years after the last one. And so I have a period where, it was a bunch of brothers and my mom, and then just me and my mom for a lot of the time. And yeah, it was great. Church, we grew up largely going to a Baptist church and had a lot of friends there. One of my best friends' dad was the pastor, and it was great. It was really, really good. And then after made it through high school, and then came to Texas A&M for my undergraduate degree. And things sort of progressed to where, as you said earlier, not many people look at what I look at. It was sort of that process after that, and the kind of discovering what did I want to do, and then studying health behavior and realizing there is actually a Christian lens, and then eventually discovering there's an ancient Christian lens to the problem as well as to the solution. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. That is really neat. So, okay, so you're growing up in Southeast Texas.
Yeah.
And I like what you point out there, that there were some years with all of these brothers in the house. And then there are these quiet years afterwards. I think people don't often think about that. Kids who grow up in big families, if you're at the tail end or if you're at the beginning of it, it's not always a big family, right? Like the household kind of grows and shrinks a little bit. But so we're just out of curiosity, when your brothers left, right? Because you're like, what, 10 years old when you're
so starting
youngest
into
older brother?
fifth grade. Yeah, starting into fifth grade. So,
oh wow, what was that like? Did that just feel like really lonely when they all took off, or were you thrilled to have your mom to yourself?
No, yeah, I don't know. I don't remember. I do remember over time, like you discover different things. That we weren't wealthy, it was just me and my mom most of the time. That I don't know. I didn't think of loneliness, or my brothers would come and visit and I would see them, but everything else was so busy. Clearly my mom was busy working, and I was doing school and sports and extracurricular. And, I don't have a negative memory of it. In other words, it was what it was. And all credit to those around me that made it a great experience.
That's great. So what kind of a kid were you? I mean, you were a busy kid, lots of extracurriculars and sports, but did you grow up just feeling like, I'm called to medicine, I'm going to be a doctor? Or did you, what did you think you were going to do?
Well, I really liked sports. And so as a young boy, there was always thoughts that you could get paid to do that for a long time. It doesn't show, but I'm not real tall here. So there was some issues with that, of being able to actually make it that far. No, I was intrigued with coaching and teaching, and that was what I originally pursued with my undergraduate degree. I kind of went away from that, but no, my dad was a veterinarian, large animal veterinarian, so I got some exposure to that. But nothing around medicine per se. I mean, probably if I look back, I've always been intrigued with behavior, odd things around behavior. Why do people behave the way they do? Why do I behave the way I do? And so there was that, but nothing so tangible that I'm like, oh yeah, I want to be a professor for sure in medicine. But it wasn't like, I don't know, I was a young boy. I kind of thought about the next minute, if that. And not really that far ahead. I knew I wanted to go to Texas A&M. It's the only university I applied to. So that was sort of the next step. And then from there, I don't know, I just didn't think that far ahead.
Yeah. That's how kids in Texas are, though. They either want to go to A&M or they want to go to UT, and they're just going to apply to that school. Well, I guess some of them want to go to Tech, right? But there's certain schools, and it depends on what part of Texas you're in, but it's like you're obsessed with that school and everybody's obsessed with that school. And A&M's kind of a cult, in some ways, right? Because people who go to A&M love Texas A&M. So were you already just totally into A&M by high school? You loved the whole idea of it?
Totally. I believe I've been told my first drawing was the Texas A&M logo. So no, yeah, I have my dad went to school here and vet school here, was in the Corps of Cadets. And then several of my older brothers went here. It's who we watched. It's who we rooted for. It's who we listened to baseball games on the radio. It's like, yeah, it is special. And it is unique in a lot of ways that there is a culture about it. They call it the spirit of Aggieland, of course, but it is unique. It does attract a particular type of student, generally, but now it's humongous, right? It's, 70,000+ students, and but it's still in the town itself around here. You're right, does maintain. This town, College Station, was originally a college and a station, a train station. It was just land before that, and then those two things come into play, and then everything grows up around the university. So it still carries that vibe as other college towns do, I think. But yeah, it's definitely unique in a good way.
Yeah, it is. And well, and a part of it maybe is also that it's kind of distant from other cities because they sort of built it out in the country, like really, an hour or two from Houston, a couple hours from Austin. And so, it really is, it still has that sort of single purpose of being a college town, as opposed to other college towns might also have a big tech industry and this and that. But its College Station is really Texas A&M, and it's a lot of Texas A&M graduates and alumni who didn't want to leave because it was such a neat town.
Or they come back. Yeah, although with that said, there's a lot of tech and business that's grown up around, and so now is complementing that, and the town is growing, and so yeah, it's unique in a lot of ways, not only from the university standpoint, but then just the culture, the people who love it here and come back because they love it here, or they love the university, they want to raise their family here, even though it's bigger of a city and clearly bigger university, you still maintain some of that cohesion, small town sort of feel. That and people are very nice, and it's just, yeah, it's a good place.
It's a very polite culture, right? Like it's very yes, ma'am, no, sir. It's nice. Mm-hmm. It's so A&M is has a big. You mentioned your dad was a cadet, right? So it's a big ROTC presence at A&M, right?
Yeah, they do have. They still have a very famous Corps of Cadets, and of course, it's not all Corps of Cadets anymore, but still very present, still very active, and still great. A&M agriculture and mechanical is still present. The vet school is great. I mean, it's all great. Mays Business School is great. The School of Medicine is really aimed at training practitioners that want to go back out into their communities, perhaps where they grew up, and be really good practitioners from that perspective, from the humanities side. That was their first department, was medical humanities. And so, yeah, the engineering, of course, is world famous there, all sorts of different types of engineering. And I'm leaving others out, of course, but they're traditionally, yes, you are right. Agriculture, mechanical, or engineering, medicine, veterinary medicine, biomedical, and so on. Yeah, definitely.
And it's a very, I think it's got such a unique culture. It's just really neat. And I think it was funny because my kids will say, like, Mom, A&M's like a cult. Like everybody, they love A&M so much. And it's true, but it's like that because they love it so much, because it is so beautiful and it is so unique and so cohesive. It's really cool. All right. So you went to A&M, but you were planning to be a coach and a teacher. So what did you study?
So the degree was kinesiology.
Okay.
And I was more on the education side of that, not so much the science side. And I did my student teaching my last year, and it was a very immersive, great experience, teaching and coaching. The setup I had in North Dallas, and lived with the family, the athletic director, head football coach. So I saw the whole thing, and they're a great family and great people. And so I saw that, and then it wasn't that I didn't like it by any means, but it just didn't feel, I don't know. It's just kind of experiencing it just sort of, but it was already my last year. So I always tell the students that I felt stuck with a kinesiology degree. And what do you do with that?
Yeah. Where do you go when just at the last minute you realize oh, this isn't actually the thing. This isn't, what did you do?
Yeah, so I took a job in the fitness industry out in California and moved out to Southern California with my border collie, and
Wow.
Worked there for a couple of years. And then I moved out, stayed in the fitness industry, started working in the church a little bit, a church there in Atlanta area. And so did that for a while. And then some things, kind of life happened, some things occurred. And I sort of, I think first I became intrigued with the mixed messages with the fitness industry. I'm trying to help people, and I would tell them one thing, but then somebody else was saying something different. This diet's better than this one. No, that diet's better than this one. No, this is how you lose weight. No, that's how you lose weight. And it sort of bugged me. But at the same time, I started working with athletes, because again, that's sort of my mindset. However, then I moved into like training fitness models. And so, but then I would have middle-aged women come to me and say, hey, will you train me? I want to look like one of those other people I was training. I was like, well, sure. I didn't know what I was doing. The long story short is I really fell out of love with the sports athletic side. And I fell in love with these mostly women, some men, who were in their struggle, because I just became fascinated in their story and their struggle. And why was it so darn hard to make this change and stick with it? And it was the combination of the combination of me realizing I don't know enough and I can't answer these questions, and it bugs me when there's differing views, and how do I know what's right, what's wrong? Am I right or am I wrong? And so that, and some other discussions with some mentors, sent me back largely knowing I'm going to get a PhD. So at that point, I knew I want to go get a PhD. I want to learn everything and try to relay and solve some of these problems and help people with this. That sent me to my master's degree. I moved back to Texas and got my master's degree in exercise physiology. And the program was very, very heavy in nutritional science, biochemistry. So I got a strong emphasis on that. However, as I dove deeper and deeper, the whole behavior change thing was sticking with me. And my primary mentor was an exercise and sports psychologist. And that's where, I kind of learned, I knew what to tell people, but I didn't know how to get them to do it.
Yes.
So to speak. And so again, through another longer story, I ended up pursuing my PhD, which is now in a field called behavioral medicine, where we look at people like me. We look at first how behavior increases or decreases risk of disease, disability, premature death, and the physiology of that. So I'm able to maintain some of that interest, how it works. If I do this behavior, how does it increase my risk? If I do this behavior, how does it decrease my risk, and so on. And then the third big pillar is the psychology, which is where I really dug in my heels on theories and explanations to generally self-regulation is what we call it, or self-control. And simply put, why is it so difficult to change? And you mentioned sort of in the intro about lifestyle as a medicine. And yeah, I do look at medication adherence, but mostly when lifestyle is that medicine. We know it can be powerful, but just like taking a pill, why is it so difficult to stick to these behaviors?
Well, and there are a lot of medications that we only have to take because we can't get our lifestyle under control, right? Like there are so many illnesses where it's like, listen, exercise and diet, and you can fix this. And we're like, oh, I'd really like to do that, but we don't do it. It's really
tough. It's tough.
It is tough. Now, are you someone who naturally has a lot of self-discipline?
Yes. Generally speaking, there's been periods of my life where, it was non-existent, but
Sure.
Generally, yes. I don't like the feeling of being out of control. And so as a subsequent benefit of that, it does tend to put me, however, you can't just bottle that. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And I meet other people who have self-control with their diet or whatever. Yet at the same time, even with myself, there's certain food, if I had it on the counter, I would not have self-control. So I just don't buy it because I know I don't have the control. So it's not like everything I'm in control, but and I'm sure people relate to that. Other things I don't have control in. I may be okay with my diet, and in exercise, for example, but I may not be as good with other things. And so I think everybody has that somewhere, or multiple things that are very difficult to control. And there's reasons for that. And actually, as we were talking before we get jumped on, there's the science side, so to speak, that I've learned and studied, sort of that general self-help approach. How do we regulate and control? But then, there's other ways of viewing that, particularly as a Christian. And it was during that study of that time of mine, there were a few light bulb moments where I started connecting this struggle, particularly back to the Christian scriptural view of that struggle.
Right. I mean, we have right there, St. Paul saying, like, why do I do the thing I don't want to do? Right. Like this problem, it's this age old problem that human beings have always had. No. And so at the time when you first started thinking about this with a Christian lens, were you still Baptist? Were you going to the Baptist church?
Well, so I was still Christian. There was a period I left the organizational church for a while. And after that, it was a mix of, visiting, the various denominations, Christian traditions, so to speak, all Protestant, generally speaking. And so, yeah, I'd maintained that, but it was, sort of like in the early stages of the fitness industry, is this diet better than this one? Who's right about this or that? I was struggling with that too. Like if somebody interpreting the scripture or talking about a certain topic, and one person says this or that, who is right? So I was sort of in that mode of, in hindsight, really the frustrations there as well. But it was just not knowing where to land, so to speak. It wasn't like I was still doing the best with what I could and what I knew.
Yeah. Well, and that's a difficult place to be. I mean, I remember I was like 23 or 24, and I knew I wanted to be baptized. I was like, we're supposed to be baptized. I know that's from the Bible, but I didn't have anyone to baptize me. I didn't know what, and I'm looking at all these different denominations, and it's just like, how do I make sense of this? How do I figure out, which door to knock on? Because they all look fine, but they disagree. So it's tricky. But so as you started looking into that, did you realize that was going to be a part of your academic studies? Or was that kind of like a personal side note while you were also working on these medical questions?
Yeah, no, in hindsight, it wasn't connected. I always talk about the pursuit of healthiness and the pursuit of holiness. And no, those were, like with a lot of folks, I think they were parallel. They weren't intersecting, they were black and white, not herringbone type thing. And so this was, I wasn't connecting. Those are definitely siloed apart. But it was in my early research. We had a large X-ray scanner called the DEXA scan. And it is the gold standard for body composition measurement. So it can tell you how dense your bones are, how much your skeleton weighs, how much muscle you have in pounds, how much fat you have in pounds and percent of your body. And so we were doing research where people would come in at this time with a weight loss program. It was mostly women, and we would scan them and give them their results. And as you might imagine, that's not benign. Clinically speaking, we think we can give people these results, everything from blood sugar to body fat, and act like it's not doing anything. So my early research was studying the emotional, motivational, and behavioral responses to those sort of screenings. And what are people doing? I just started asking, what are you going to do? Because people get very upset, right? And, when they find out they have, in some of this research, they would have over 100 pounds of fat on their body, 60% of their body, these very health concerning situations. And just seeing and realizing that there's an image that comes with it, it's just sort of a weird experience. And so as I was researching that there was a consistency in response, but I then started asking, like, why are you upset? And it was always, almost always, body shape, body size, hips and waist and all these different things. And I started asking why, why body fat? Who cares? And all these things. And most of my mentors came from a social kind of perspective, nurture. It's the way they grew up, or the way media exposes those things, body image and so on. And not that I dismiss that at all, but it just felt like there was something deeper, almost more innate, that was very, very consistent, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And my mentor actually recommended I go talk to a professor at University of Texas, where I was getting my PhD in evolutionary psychology, and he is like he's the I mean, world renowned, like top whatever. I mean, and so so I called him up, met with him, and he was just absolutely phenomenal and very kind to me, and said, you know what, you should come take my doctoral seminar with his lab and all his students, who were also great and extremely smart. And I was by far the dumbest one in this group. And they were nice enough to allow me in. And in short, we didn't talk about creation or any of those things, but it was about, their theory, and I'm clearly doing this very briefly and high level, but in short, that there are mechanisms that we have psychologically that would have helped us survive. And the ones who had those mechanisms survive, like the giraffe with a long neck could get the leaves. Perhaps the one with a certain psychological, like a desire or a craving for high-fat, high-sugar food, was the one who ate the high-fat, high-sugar food, thus survived. The one who didn't died, passed on genes, and so on. So now we have these sort of caveman minds in modern world, a natural response to an unnatural environment, all that stuff. But it was, which is fascinating in and of itself, and it really made sense, at least to what I was seeing in the data. But it's coincidental you mentioned St. Paul, because in that parallel pursuit of reading scriptures and things, it hit me that this sounds an awfully lot like the flesh. This sounds awfully lot about, I didn't know the word passions back then, but desire, appetites. And I connected this state that we're in and these desires that come with us and how powerful they are. And no wonder they're powerful. But of course, it allowed me to start connecting in spiritual perspectives to that I never had done before. And that was really a big catalyst for me to where I am now, where they're definitely more herringbone now than they were back then.
That is really cool. That's very interesting. All right. Well, so we are going to take a very short break, just about a minute. We'll be gone for a minute. We'll be right back, because I want to hear more about how all of that started to come together for you, because that's very interesting. So we'll be right back with Dr. Mark Faries in just a moment. See you soon.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich-Davis will be back in a moment. Give Elisa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
A walk through Acts provides a complete overview of the Acts of the Apostles in 26 compelling lessons with additional activities, coloring pages, and memory verses for children ages 5 to 12. Each lesson is designed as a conversational guide for building spiritual interactions within the context of the Holy Scripture and fits into the framework of an hour-long session. The extra activities, split into age groups of 5 to 8-year-olds and 9 to 12-year-olds, allow the students to dive more deeply into the subject matter, but can also be distributed as take-home materials. The lessons are designed for both inexperienced and veteran teachers. While Orthodox children have likely heard the gospel stories repeatedly in liturgy and in church school, the follow-up stories related in the book of Acts are often overlooked. This curriculum addresses this deficit with a focused look at this sequel to the Gospels. A walk through Acts is written from an Orthodox Christian perspective with supporting notes from the Church Fathers. It is accompanied by iconographic illustrations that help inform each of the 26 lessons and activities. This work aspires to be a springboard into a lifelong adventure of scriptural study. Available at store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich-Davis. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Elisa.
And welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. We're here tonight talking to Dr. Mark Faries. And we were just talking about how over time, these, religious questions of the sort of the passions, or at the time, maybe just more fleshly desires or whatever you wanted to call it, started sort of coming into play when you were looking at this behavioral medicine research that you were doing. So how did all of that evolve for you? How does that change over the years for you?
Yeah, so it's a long story, but I think I just first started looking at everywhere where desire was discussed, or appetites, and trying to, the best as I could, learn the difference between those. Is there a difference between those words, where they're used, how they're used? And like when you talked about St. Paul and him talking about that, I know the right thing to do, but don't have the ability to carry it out. What is his solution to that problem? Knowing that he's not necessarily talking about health behavior, but he's talking about the flesh. And so if I was going to approach it to where the flesh is the foundational concern and the driving force behind, we know in humans, we all have this natural craving for high fat, high sugar food, for survival, fear of death. And so I started studying fear of death and death. And then how could that be a motivating factor? And should it be a motivating factor? We're very good at conserving energy, being lazy, if I can put it that way. And are these sort of blameless? Are they blameworthy? Is it okay to be hungry or not? And I started studying first and foremost by far the scriptures as best as I could understand. And then I started listening to any commentary, reading any commentary, which was mostly modern commentary, which is extremely little on these things. And so I was having trouble finding, people would talk about like health in general, food in general, but the struggle with behavior, health behavior, I couldn't find much at all. So I was scrounging, looking, reading, and trying to do the best I could. And then I started discovering what I now know as the apostolic fathers and the church fathers and mothers. I didn't know they existed. I didn't know these writings existed, that people were writing, the early parts of the church. And I discovered that they talk about it a lot as a primary focus. And that's when things really opened up for me. Was when I got to that point, and that was another big turning point for me.
How did you feel when you discovered the apostolic father? Just that they existed, like just out of curiosity, because I personally felt like there was this phase I went through where I was sort of mad that I didn't know, like I didn't even realize there was like all of these writings. You just sort of imagine that like, oh, people just didn't write anything down, I guess, for 1,000 years. You don't even think about it. Were you annoyed that you didn't know about that before? Were you just didn't worry about that, just happy to have found it? Like, how did that work out for you emotionally as you made these discoveries?
That's a good question. I mean, I think at first I was just like, I was pretty stoked, because then it probably a bit of, I was never angry about it or anything. I was perplexed. It did make me think, how come, why have I not heard this before? And growing up, what went wrong? How come I didn't grow up hearing these names and these people? And, why was I told it was dark and there was nobody doing and again, I don't think anybody was out to prevent me from reading or anything. It was just sort of the natural progression, but still somewhat perplexed. And then for me, at least, when you start reading, there is sort of like, holy moly, I have a lot of catch up to do. Like, I don't, and then clearly that's where it really starts overlapping, at least for me, with, there's sort of this maybe people can relate to this, but there's sort of this underlying motivation to find the original church, the original views on things. And I sort of equate, the cartoons where people like, they jump in as like all this smoke and sparks and stars flying out, and that people are arguing about these things and theories of atonement and this and that I was very interested in learning what's right or wrong. And then to discover there's been a view on these things since the beginning. And it was sort of like I don't know what the word would be, but it sort of moved from perplexing to sort of, it's more of a craving. I want that. Like, and with that, I think as I moved in and actually found, there was a church still practicing these things, that there was a relief that came from that. There was a major freedom that came with that, some of these things I didn't have to get in that little mix of cartoon characters fighting on different topics when there'd already been a view on a lot of these things for a long, long time. And that allowed me and gave me a lot of relief to then focus on my interests now with the passions and desires, and how do we apply that lens to health and gluttony and sloth. And we were talking acedia earlier, like all these things that now interest me personally, but also professionally as a professor. And yeah, so that maybe if that makes sense, sort of perplexing and then started craving it.
Oh yeah, it does. I think a lot of Orthodox converts, probably it's very specific to the American experience, but I think a lot of converts feel this relief that like, oh, I can just lean in and just trust this. And it's like that decision fatigue problem where you have so many decisions to make. Yeah. And it was like, it was up to me to construct a theology without any information. It's like, good, so there's already a theology.
Yeah. And I think there's a life, and Father John really helped me early on too, to realize that it's not just this intellectual, like the way we would describe it, pursuit, that there's a life there, and that there's sacramental life, and there's things we do in physical world that have spiritual implications, and some things that were that somewhat void from what I knew. But yeah, for me, it was like, I tell people, this is a bit of an exaggeration, but not really. I mean, once I discovered that, I was like, when do I bow? Where? What do I kiss? Tell me when to kiss it. Like, because that's the way it was always been done. It was, I wanted to sort of dive in. I didn't really, but my view that I grew up with is different than that. Well, of course it's different from that. And so as I studied church history a bit more, it made sense why something I may have had, a thought I may have had earlier, why it was different. It didn't make me angry or anything. It's just what I knew, but I understood now why there was that disconnect. And I was sort of ready to kind of go all in, not necessarily just intellectually, but in the life that we're called to live.
So in this part, you mentioned Father John. Where were you when you were first looking at the Orthodox Church, and what was the parish like that you found?
Yeah, so I first started looking at the ancient writings. So I did that for years,
right,
before knowing there was an Orthodox Church, because you can find the writings online. And it was really kind of studying the church history and looking at the figures that are out there, right, where things start bifurcating and then schisming and branching off. It was, so, I did that for several years. And then it was here in College Station, probably, maybe 4 years ago, that I realized, that the Orthodox Church still exists. And kind of on a whim, thank goodness for the World Wide Web, I went on and searched Orthodox Church, College Station, Texas, and sure enough, St. Silouan Orthodox Church popped up and I emailed Father John, and I went and visited and had great conversations with him. The people who were there, it was very different. I walked into a different world, as many people talk about, a very ancient world, and but people there were extremely nice. But it was also very reverent and very different. I didn't know what to do. It's like going to the gym, do I grab a towel or not? Do I sit? Where do I put the towel when I'm done? Can I get on this machine? I felt like all those people I'd worked with all those years trying to navigate the public fitness industry. And so with that's what cued myself. And then, eventually my family moving in, and that's where we are now, and definitely embedded, and now with OCF, and moving full steam ahead.
That's great. So you were already married when you found the Orthodox Church.
Two little girls. Yeah.
Was that hard on your wife? Like, or was she kind of there all those years where you're looking at the fathers and she was a little intrigued by it too? Or how did that, because that's always a tricky thing, right? Like when you have two people who have to navigate it with different experiences.
And thank God it went well for us. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but she wasn't necessarily interested in the fathers, but she was also disgruntled with just something about the way we were kind of jumping from church to church and looking just didn't feel right, and never felt, not that, again, the people were great. Like we were going, it's nothing against them, and we were always welcome in all these places, and we learned. And so, but it just, for her, if the way she's told me, it just didn't feel right. Sort of the funny part is when I first went to the Orthodox, to a service, what I now know as a Vespers service, Saturday Vespers. And I didn't know the incense smelled. Like I just didn't know these things. And then, I don't know, I was very wild, and I was pretty excited. So I went home, and then she started looking at some stuff online, like services. And this is, after the main influx of COVID, right? So it's a lot of options online, seeing all these things. Production quality was very poor in a lot of these. They're just live streaming it. And so she watched some, and then kind of the process and the Eucharist, and she's like, nah, we're not doing that. And so I was like, come on. And so she finally went, and, sort of nervous, and the service goes on. And I talked to Father John several times since then. It wasn't too long, but we leave for first visit. I was like, hey, what'd you think? And she said, that's church. And then that was it. And then our girls, they're now 9 and 6. It was super easy for them. And everything made much more sense to them than, it's like bowing to someone out of respect, out of veneration. That's what people do to princesses in the cartoons, right? It's not like some big shock. And their ability to hear the theology that's chanted and sung, and to grasp it very, very quickly. And it's not only that in the service, but we all, clearly believe Christ is there. But the people are incredible, and the families that are there, and the kids that they're connected with. And so that's been, it's a wonderful little parish, and they've been very, very good to us.
That's fantastic. So it's only 4 years, right? So how would you say that Orthodoxy started to inform? Well, I guess you were already reading the fathers, though, so they were already in your work, right? So how has being Orthodox changed the way that you're seeing these things, like really practicing?
It changes a lot because, one, there's sort of the midlife crisis you have early on when you realize that all these years of studying this sort of secular view of behavior change and is not necessarily inconsistent at times, but largely inconsistent with what Christianity, particularly ancient Christianity, would say about it. And so, it informs what I do a lot. Now that I'm a full professor, I'll be able to, write about these things a bit more, present on these things a bit more, continue to learn, have people critique, and continue to learn from that. It's a putting on a whole new lens. It's a different paradigm. It's a different perspective. So yes, I see the problem and the struggles very, very differently. But the result of that is that the solutions generally are very sacramental, right? It's prayer, it's vigils, it's the Eucharist. It's these things that we've been given. And talking about the passions generally, I read a lot on what do ascetics say, what have the saints said, what do monastics say about this, and then I realize, well, maybe I should be doing those things too. And then I feel like an idiot for teaching these things because I'm not practicing them to the extent that I'm called to practice them either. So I think a lot of this for us has been moved us away from purely some kind of intellectual pursuit, and again, more into the sacramental life. And what does that look like for not only me personally, but for the family and for my kids? And so the participation in the Christian life it's a lot more and very fulfilling from that standpoint. So it's beginning and has, and hope, pray to God, it continued to change us too personally, especially if I'm going to be trying to talk to other people about this and emphasizing. And it's been very self-reflective.
Yeah.
Very repentant.
That's neat. Yeah, that's what I was thinking as you were talking. I was thinking it called you to repentance in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
It calls you to, which maybe your work before didn't, because you are a person who generally does healthy things and eats well and whatever. So it's like all of a sudden there's this challenge to like, oh, there's a whole bunch of stuff you could be doing. And I think that's true for all
why,
of us.
Yeah, and why we're doing those things and why is health important at all? And separating that and ourselves from idolatry and actually seeing it in the proper perspective.
Oh, that's very interesting that you said. Do you feel like there's some idolatry of health in our culture?
Yeah, I mean, it comes up in the people have been writing about that for a long time, of the body and how we treat it, and God's temple, not my temple, kind of is probably the most common way of viewing that. But behaviors and who are we serving and why are we serving? The passions, again, are most common, enslaving ourselves back to those. And how does my day-to-day set up to actually enslave myself back to those? And why am I doing that? And what am I setting before God that I'm pursuing that and these sort of worldly perspectives and fixes and desires rather than transforming those desires toward Christ and our progress. But so, yeah, I mean, I think there could easily be a case made that not only the body itself, but the pursuits of health, why we're even pursuing health, which seems to be this sort of unambiguous, sort of just general, it's a good thing, right? But not necessarily, why do we want health? Why do we want to look a certain way? And what is the underlying cause and motivation for that, and what is the result of that pursuit, and how does it change us? And yeah, I mean, to your point, simply who are we worshiping, and we know that who we worship changes us. So I pick up that a lot. It's hard to think about how to apply that today. The St. John of Kronstadt talks about smoking, cigarette smoking and things, and my life in Christ. But they don't talk about fast food. They don't talk about junk food because it wasn't a thing. So you're taking principles and, I'm very gun shy, so to speak, when it comes to that, because I don't want to say the wrong thing or see it differently or see it incorrectly, but there's an underlying connection there. Yes, the body and our behavior connected to idolatry, even though we might be pursuing some healthier behaviors or things that on the surface look good, but then underlying the health of the soul, why are we pursuing those?
Absolutely. Well, and there are a lot of interesting reflections on that in our culture, right? Like there's some of the saints will write about the idol of the family, and that, it's like, oh, I'm just here to protect my family. And that sounds like a really good thing, but there's a way that that can become a spiritual illness as well. So there are a lot of, that's the nature of the passions, right? Like it starts as a good thing and then it gets out of control and then it's not.
Yeah. And that's by definition, right? It's giving control over and being affected and being controlled by those things, which again, I think everybody can relate to, particularly around food or inactivity, these things that we're challenged with very, very often. And do we really have control? I often, the work we do across the state, these questions come up around, I'm in control. And well, what's the most unhealthy thing you do? And they may say, I don't know, soda, something like that. And I was like, all right, well, give it up forever. And they're like, well, I couldn't do that. Or just eat in moderation to where you're not negatively affecting your health. Well, yeah, but that's like, so this kind of simple thought process for me, with whatever and anybody else is, I think we can quickly see that, maybe I'm not as much in control of some of those behaviors and some of those desires as maybe I thought. And then maybe I'm being acted upon and it allows us to self-reflect, I think, a bit more deeply if we sort of challenge those things. You said earlier, we kind of get in our flow and not really think about it in that way. I ask people, how easy is it for you to eat unhealthfully in your house? And if they say, well, it's pretty easy, well, then that's clearly a challenge to self-control. Right. If you crave those things and you see them, you may have best intentions, but it's a challenge. And then I would connect, is that making provision for the flesh to satisfy or gratify its desires, as St. Paul says? And so that's where I'm at now, is trying to connect these things, and have been for years, and trying to make sense that we can, again, connect back with Christ, who at the end of the day is the goal.
Do you find that these very ancient Orthodox concepts resonate well in like non-Orthodox churches, and how does that go? Do you sometimes get some pushback on it? Like, because as you mentioned, the answers are really sacramental. And so, a lot of Christians in the United States and certainly in Texas are not sacramental in the way that they're thinking about, but they are thinking about holiness and God's grace, right?
Yeah,
so how does that go for you?
Yeah, so it varies. There are so many Christian traditions with different views, perhaps, of the body. Is the body something that's just, as we hear often, a prison house of the soul, very Platonic, and we just need to get rid of it. It doesn't matter what you do to it. Those are clearly very challenging conversations. But no, the others, more commonly would say, no, it means something, what we do. A lot of times they've already connected certain health behaviors, which this is my new research now, is smoking, for example, cigarettes or tobacco. I met a woman years ago in East Texas, and she said that her pastor smoked while he preached. And I thought back, me growing up, people smoked in the parking lot a lot. But now the thought of, in many circles, many traditions, faith traditions, of the clergy, pastor, priest smoking during the service just seems completely odd, even to those that they may have done it in the years past. Well, they have internalized those behaviors into some value that they have, like the body as God's temple, for example. So they've already done it with certain health behaviors, but not necessarily all. Now, smoking is the second leading risk factor for premature death in the U.S. I said earlier, diet's number one. So they're already doing it for the second leading risk factor. Why not apply those same views to the leading risk factor? So that's usually where our conversations go, and I let them sort of tell me what is their approach. And even in the class I teach a health and spirituality class, and I challenge the students to think about this from their tradition. And I think, to your question, when I bring up the church fathers or mothers or writings, there will be the response that automatically they're wrong for some reason, or they're made up, or they don't know what they're talking about because it's not just the scripture, it's outside of the scripture. Yet if I refer to a more modern commentary, it's okay. So I get a little bit of that, although I'm getting more and more where people are from different traditions are able to access these ancient writings more and more, and they're even quoting some, or if I quote some of the bigger names, so to speak, modern saints or modern, maybe a little more difficult. But at the same time, it's not that they're completely discrepant from the scriptures, right? I mean, they're sending us back to the scriptures. But to your point, that is where the big hiccup, I think, comes, is then how do we apply those scriptures in life? Is there a spiritual component to those things that we're asked to do? The Eucharist, for example, does that do anything? Is there any, as we pray, healing of soul and body? If there's not, then that's not going to be a recommendation for them in that tradition, because it's not a thing. But they may have other things that they can apply. Of course, from my perspective now, the true depth, the fullness would come from the sort of ancient original views on these topics.
Yeah. Well, and we were talking a little bit about before the show as well, just about this idea that sometimes you bring up these very beautiful ancient ideas, these ancient Christian thoughts, and people often find them really interesting, even if that doesn't mean that they, go off and become Orthodox and then they're fasting and their whole life has changed. There's still, really interesting insights, and they help people to maybe have a slightly different view on the scriptures and a slightly different way of interpreting things that maybe is better. And every once in a while, you are going to have somebody who, like you, is looking at this academically or is looking at this for some other reason, and then very slowly comes to realize, like, oh, there's a church and I want to go there.
Yes.
But,
that's right.
So do you have like with your students, is there anyone who has like sort of connected this with Orthodoxy? Do you connect it with Orthodoxy in your class? Do you say, like, I go to this church and we study all these ancient things, and like, how does that work out in class?
Yeah. So they know, this particular class, it's not an ancient Christianity and health class.
Right.
That would be very cool and would be fun. Yet most of my examples are clearly that, and they know that that's the tradition I come from. And so that's the perspective that I have. The way I handle it now is I let them pursue the work that needs to be done, the project, so to speak. They have to do a reflection, for example, on the body and physical health from their tradition, the mind and mental health, right? And what is the mind, as we know with the ancient faith? That's a very complicated question. Is it the brain? Is it a soul? Is it a spirit? And what is the? Right. So through that, when they go and think and read and talk to their clergy, pastor, priest, these same questions, and when they are able or not able to get answers from them, and they're really challenged to think about, again, a lot of these are pre-med, they're pre-clinical settings, pre-PA, pre-nursing, therapy. And so they're going to be working with patients and clients who are bringing their religious beliefs into health decisions. And if their religious tradition doesn't allow them to eat meat or animal products, then that changes what vaccine they get, because the vaccine may have gelatin or egg. If they don't take blood transfusions because the life is in the blood, if they have kidney disease and they're needing dialysis, how does that conversation go? Or how could we talk to them beforehand? If that's their tradition and they're not going to be able to accept dialysis, then maybe we talk more prevention, and how would we set up programs and education? So it's not shying away from it. It's actually sort of engaging it, and people are making decisions. A lot of people are making decisions based on their religious beliefs, finances, marriage, jobs. Health is one of those, and embracing that and letting them reflect on that. And yes, subsequently, people become more and more aware and more intrigued with these ancient views, and having, I know we didn't get time to talk about it, but having OCF and Alexandros and his wife Rachel is a real strong asset. But I do employ Orthodox students. I'm bringing one student to the O-Camper conference where I'll be speaking on all this stuff, because he wants to pursue medicine. He's pre-med from an Orthodox perspective. And so, just helping students spend time there and then connect with others there and trying to live that life out themselves.
That's fantastic. That's neat. I think it's so valuable, and it's going to be so helpful to all of these people as they enter the medical field. And it's a lot for them to be thinking about. And it's good, because it just feels like maybe that's something that's not always covered. I don't know. Maybe it is, but it's beautiful. So, Dr. Mark, thank you so much.
You are welcome.
Don't worry, we'll talk about OCF later, because Alexandros is going to come on the program this fall. So don't worry, we'll cover
he's
it.
the one to talk about it anyway.
He'll tell us all about it. But no, this was fantastic, Mark. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
You're welcome. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. And thank you to our audience for joining us. And come on back next Sunday night. We'll meet another Everyday Orthodox Christian. Good night.